Welcome to Praise, Prayer and Preaching with the Rev Dr Keith Garner.
Our end of year service is always an important one, but it comes as we enter December. And as is frequently the case, it coincides with the beginning of the season of Advent, which in point of fact is not the end of the year, but the beginning of the Christian year. So that enables us to both look back, to give thanks, and to anticipate the future, and to gather together some of the aspects of hope that we know are with us. At the end of the year, there's a good, healthy reflection taking place. Very soon, not only newspapers, but every kind of social media will be crowded with the names that have helped to shape the kind of year that we're coming out of. As we draw to a close, we look back at the sports personalities, the politicians, and the people who have suddenly, in their 15 minutes of fame, been thrust, as it were, into our public recognition. An authentic Christian contribution, however, does something far more than merely do that. It gathers together our thinking and holds it up before God and says to God, this is for that which we are thankful for. Your blessing, your guidance, your grace in our lives in this and many ways. So I used Philippians chapter 4, the passage that Keith read to us here in the Wesley Theatre just a few moments ago. Philippians 4, 10 to 20, a focus to draw our thoughts together and gather around, as it were, that note of thanksgiving. It's surprising to find an elaborate and carefully worded expression of thanks coming to an end rather than at the outset. So usually when a person writes a letter, they might say, I'm writing to you to thank you, Aunt Jessie, for that wonderful jumper you knitted me, or to your mate to say that you're thankful. No, that's not how this letter goes. This letter goes through all its substance, and then at the end, flips on its end and says thank you. That's very interesting. Now, 4 things need to be kept in mind whenever you turn to Philippians in the New Testament. The first is this, that Paul is writing to a church for whom he had a very special kind of affection. Secondly, the Philippians supported him in his work and his ministry when other churches in other parts of Europe and now what we know as Turkey didn't always support him, but they did. It contains some of the most memorable words in the whole of the New Testament. And the Philippians' private struggles are compounded by opposition and suffering from outside. Paul expresses his gratitude for their gifts and their support. But he goes on to say, but I could probably manage without them. What a thing to say. Thanks very much for that gift. But I could have done without it. Now, I don't think he's quite saying that, but he's actually recognizing the resourcefulness of God in such a statement. Ken Grayston, actually a scholar, suggests that this is an awkward thing to try to say in any kind of letter. Try to imagine a group of people. You got together, you clubbed together with your mates, and you said, we're going to support a project in the center of Australia with a group of people who are very marginalized. We're going to put the money together to support them. And after a time, you get a letter back from them, a very long letter, offering advice on how you might do things better, and with a little mention of the support that you gave them. Well, you've really got to scratch deeply in this epistle to really understand that the appreciation that Paul expresses goes much, much further than just thanks for what you've done for me. It somehow translates and gathers and holds that thanksgiving and holds it before God. They're more than just a few paragraphs of gratitude. In fact, when you come to the end, it's replete with this note of thanksgiving to God. So the text is Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. Now, Paul came from Tarsus. Now, most people, when they're studying Paul, say, Tarsus, he was a tent maker, he came from there. But there's something probably far more important than knowing what Paul's previous occupation was about Tarsus. Tarsus was very much a center of Stoicism. Now, that's really a very special attitude to life. It's one where perhaps, this is 300 years prior to this letter, not at the time, it had grown up, it developed, it started to become a philosophical way of life. Stoicism could be summed up, I think, in that attitude, one in which for virtue in life, all you need is for happiness, is something about sticking at it. A stoical person might be immune from misfortune and suffering. When you know that, you can understand something about these people, and you can understand something of the way Paul looked at the world. Not that he was a Stoic. There were many things about Paul that was very different than that. Earlier parts of the letter could be read in that light, but Paul and the Stoics were very, very different. Paul didn't believe that the intrinsic force in the human being against all outward pressure is merely human effort. He knew it needed to be something more. He said that which sustains a person, that which keeps a person solid, that which sustains a person in life, that which gives value and quality and purpose and meaning to life, a good thing to ask ourselves at the end of a year, those things are to do with God's gifting, not our gifts. There's one of the ways in which most individuals and communities engaged in a significant part of Australian life, as a community like that here at Wesley Mission, there's something that stands us apart, I think. First of all, and I don't say this just out of flattery, I think we employ some very talented people. We've seen that tonight. People who stick at it, who don't just float in and float out, who don't just float in to critique other people, but stick at it and work hard. Those people who adopt a strategic planning approach in relation to mission, that's something that's unique about us compared to some. And also we take a sensible, conservative view to finance. We don't do crazy things on the money edge. And those things are all very, very important when we come to an end of the year and we're able to gather some things for which we're thankful to God. But those things won't provide us success. Those things won't determine that the future's all going to be good. We need the blessing of God. And as we seek God's blessing, what are we asking for? What will it mean? Well, strength will be given appropriate to the task. I think it's so important to recognize that there is a matching going on between what is needed and what is given, between the emptiness of our own efforts and the resourcefulness of a loving God. Those things meet together. Have you ever watched a child struggle around for the first time, trying to walk? In our own family, sliding around has often been a far better option than trying to walk for quite a time. There can be struggle involved in walking, and at times even tears. But mind you, once they do start to walk, move everything up quickly. There is something about our life that involves sweat and tears and hard work. Everyone learns that way. Einstein, Churchill, Beethoven, Don Bradman. Don Bradman, did you hear that? Everyone in the field of thinking, in the field of integrity of business life, in the field of so many aspects of life, it involves so often that hard work that is necessary. Most new things begin with some sense of struggle, which requires determination. It shouldn't surprise us, therefore, that in our vital engagement in our community here in Australia, it involves sometimes the execution of hard work. This can be particularly true when we launch a program, when we do something new, perhaps even more so when new factors arise, when a delivery of a service has begun that were never envisaged when we were at the tender stage and where we were looking at what it was that we were doing, suddenly things emerge. We often learn far more from life's problems than we do from its successes. That's the greatest place to learn. Not when it's going well, but when it's tough, when it's hard, when folks are not helpful, when the program is facing challenges. That's when it's the great learning moment, and one for which we can receive from God the strength that's appropriate to the task. We often learn far more in those moments. Here we discover the real pathway to life's success. In a distinctive sense, that's why the way of the cross, in the Christian understanding of its theology and thinking, will always resonate best with people who know what it is to live on that difficult place, on that difficult edge. Because the cross speaks about the transformation, the translation of those pains and hurts and sin in our life to something better, to something new and fresh and wonderful, sparkling and alive through the Spirit of God. There's no Christianity without ultimately referring to the great reach of a God whose reach to us is from a cross. I recall talking with Joni Erickson, who has spent most of her life as a marvelous Christian witness, bereft of what many of us would take for granted in terms of physical abilities. She sat in the wheelchair as I talked to her. And I remember reading afterwards some words that she wrote. Sometimes all you can do is just cry. The Bible says there is a time to weep. I would say to someone who's hurting right now, just get angry with God. Better to get angry with him than walk away from him. Rant and rave if you must. Scream and yell. She concludes, the people who are the most joyful, not just giddy, happy and silly, the people who have most even keel about them in terms of their lives, of their quiet joy, seem to be those who've suffered a great deal. We need both personally and as a community of word and deed to understand what's being said in that. Not to say, bring on suffering, but to recognize that in the difficulties and in the challenges, somehow there, the most wonderful pearl is developed. The most wonderful opportunities are not only given, but taken. I read of a man in public life who broke down from fatigue. He lost control of himself and went for help. Knowing that this wasn't the first time that this had happened in his life, he had had what people might call a breakdown 30 years earlier. Indeed, it was a very similar episode. The doctor reminded him of the subsequent bitter experience, suggesting it might have been lingering around somehow in the subconscious terranean passages of his mind and life, and he was being reminded of it now. And perhaps he was fearful it might play itself out exactly the same all over again. But with the help of good physicians and good friends, he did eventually return to health. And in times his fears began to melt away. Just when he was utterly hopeless, he found a God-given supply of energy and strength and grace. End of the year can have something of that feeling that, gosh, I'm ready for January. I'm ready for sitting on the beach, sitting in the SCG, some of us, and relaxing. But you know, perhaps it's now, as we recognize that in the challenges, in the difficulties, and in those places when the bamboo is twisted and when we've been pushed right to the limit, at those places, we know more of God's grace than any other place, if we're willing to reach out for it. In 8 years of ministry and leadership here in Sydney, there have been some times where I've come to a raised plateau, and after some challenges have been faced together with my team, I've thought to myself, it's now going to be good to have a period of real stability, and the challenges are just going to, just for a year or two, just level. And then you hardly finish the prayer or the word or the thought through the mind, and the next challenge arises. Do you know, thank God. Remember when you face those, that some people have to clean the streets of Sydney every day, and that some people in our community don't have any work whatsoever to do. And for that challenge, we say, thank God That you've placed us at a point in time, in a place, with the tools, the abilities, the skills, and the collegiality to make a difference and to bring quality into people's lives. I must say, every time I've felt that desire for that calmness and nothing going wrong for a while, I've reflected over the last months and short period of time some of the changes in the statutory care of children, changes in the way governments at both state and federal level are dealing with services and funding, changes in the aged care sector, changes in our national responses to disability and the emerging NDIS, changes in the way supported accommodation is addressed, as steadily growing numbers of people who are homeless in the wider understanding of homeless, changes in mental health care, and the development of our hospitals, and the integrated support of patients, not only in places, but in the community. And the incorporation at Wesley Mission through this last year, another challenge, as we've sought to say, we don't want to be one of those organizations that says, well, we started as a Christian organization. We did not start as a Christian organization. We are a Christian organization. And as soon as we lose that, we lose everything. And incorporation doesn't mean for 1 minute that has to happen. It is the men and women, young people, and in church and in community services that will ensure that that doesn't happen. It's not down to one person, to one board. It's down to all of us to dream that dream continually of a vibrant Christian community service at the heart of this great city. The challenges of an increasingly secular framework in which we as a Christian organization must face. One of our greatest challenges is who we are. Very kindly, the chairman of our board earlier talked about the recognition of Wesley Mission. But we're also known as a Christian agency too. And that causes its challenges, believe me. But we ain't going to change that. We're grateful to God that He's with us. Far bigger than political decision making. Far more embracing is the vision of God than a vision of ideas in an organization. That grasp which is real and is powerful. We see it in a very real way. The challenge and chases, we see multiple layers of change and challenge before us. Not just one layer, but multiple layers. It approaches us on all fronts. We know as well as anybody that we have to do more and more with less and less. And here's the bad news. It isn't going to stop. The change of government hasn't made that easier. In fact, here's the whisper, it's going to make it worse. Because we're going to have to face trying and seeking to care for people with less resources than we've ever had in terms of those services. And what's even worse, perhaps at times, is that the risks are being pushed out. The risks are no longer with Macquarie Street or in Canberra. The risks are with you and I. And that in itself is part of the change. We live in a parlous world where kindness can often be in short supply. There's an amusing and powerful story of a couple who went to see their bank manager for a loan. After he'd taken their particulars and looked through the information that they'd given them, he looked at the two of them and said, by rights, I should refuse your request, but I'm going to give you a sporting chance. Now, one of my eyes is made of glass. If you can tell me which one it is, I'll grant you the loan. The pair were very nervous about this, and they started looking at each other. And the husband said, well, I think it's that one. He said, you're right. He said, how did you guess? He said, it's the only one that's got any kindness and sympathy in it. and I think, for many, many people, they are wrestling with life and its challenges, with multiple children, with a market in housing that makes the prices of houses in Sydney obscene for the majority of its citizens. Obscene. Making it more and more difficult for them to survive? Oh, yes, there is an answer. There is a place, it's about 200 kilometers from here, just over the mountains and down, there's a village, you can live there. What about my job, mate? But one challenge. To a challenge when people begin to sum up people's conditions in terms of everything being their fault. We live in an era when boat people are used as political footballs. When most of you are really boat people. Oh, I'll grant it was a few generations ago. We observe a young man, king hit in our city, dies on our streets, and he gets a 4-year sentence. 4 years! The word obscene isn't strong enough for that. We observe the vastly different ways in which we have to deal with issues. We saw the wonderful ways, and how could we end the year without thinking of the wonderful ways in which so many of our firefighters, in fact some of our own staff, which we're very proud of, that are volunteer firefighters, were able to stand up against all the possibility of loss of life and those hundreds of houses that were destroyed. But just one person died. And even there, not directly because of the fire. And then you switch it on its end and you look at the Philippines. And you see literally hundreds of thousands of people without a home. The figure last night was 5,600 people declared dead. And that number will rise. And you see the enormous difference. Here we are. We have been blessed with so many things in this country. Not only sunshine, but wealth and resources. There shouldn't be the poverty that there is. There shouldn't be the hunger that there is for many of the basic qualities and services of life. There shouldn't be the people that couch surf and bounce as families from one to the other. There shouldn't be the struggle to find support when you have children and people look at you because you've got children and you say, well, you shouldn't have them if you can't afford them. This is becoming a more difficult community. And there are many aspects of our life that are getting heartless. And Wesley Mission can inject into that community real care and real vision and real compassion. And I suspect living with these kind of challenges is going to be normative in the future. It's not going to go away. And as a Christian community, we have to bear our witness effectively. And thirdly, we can always discern opportunities for growth. With one part of our vision, we scan the past to understand what has happened. We take a journey back and we see what's happened over this past year. But we know that the future, even though there's more than a tad uncertainty about that future, there's marvelous opportunities that lie before us. We need the strength and power to live out our dream at Wesley Mission, that will enable us to take on the challenges and to be afraid of no one or no situation. We met as a senior leadership team in November. We were joined by 13 of my senior executives. And when we met together, we talked about growth. And during this past year, we've begun to see indicators and signs of how perhaps we have come through a time when we've had to do all those things to keep things steady, as it were, on the deck. But now we are entering a time when we must talk openly about the growth of our work and witness. Not merely green shoots, but something more. As we consider our work with children and families, there are new and imaginative opportunities arising for us. The program that we've just been given to deal with mums, with kids, with mums and kids matters, to deal with mental health issues as they strike in families. It was marvelous, really, to stand there only a matter of a couple of weeks ago and to know that this program had been put in the hands of Wesley Mission. Nobody else, the first program of its kind in Australia, because there's a degree of trust in what we do and who we are and what we can do in the future. Then we see, without shouting it, and we've not done any of that kind of shouting about how great we are, we have seen our out-of-home care double. Double. 500 and odd children that are being cared for in that kind of way. And we looked at that program where we've seen a program to do with youth hope, which is to do with young people. We've got a program in the Hunter Valley and around Newcastle working with doctors' surgeries and providing care for people with chronic mental health issues in the community. This has happened during this year. So when you're tempted to be in the place to think, oh, things are not moving forward, they are. And what's more, they're providing the sustaining base that will help us to plan for growth into the future. But I did ask our general managers to look carefully at this area of growth. And in sharing with the executive managers, they will remember, those that are here tonight, that I asked some questions. What will growth look like? And this will vary across the organization, but it's certainly important to capture what will growth actually look like for us. What are the opportunities of growth as we see them in our own particular area from our own perspective? And what are the capacity, capability, and perceived caution that we must have? As we come to the close of a year, I want to end with a word of challenge. A word of challenge to every one of you. A challenge that we cannot avoid. Paul said to the church at Philippi that God would give them the strength that they require for the things that they face, for the circumstances that open up for them. Tonight, we've honored some of our people who've stayed with us on that journey for many years. Now is not the time for drawing back. Perhaps now, after a number of years of having to build a platform for growth and movement, now is the time for us to buy those opportunities and to reach out. And for every one of us to feel somehow some refreshment. Not everything at work is great wherever you work, whether it's the ABC or channel, whatever it is. Wherever you are. But I know this. The one thing that can stand us out tonight as we come to the end of the year is we're in this together because of Christ. None of us here are here because we think somehow we've got skills that are better than somebody else. That we've chosen this just because we want to be here rather than some other social agency. We're here because the kingdom of the loving God in Jesus Christ has called us together in one place at one time to serve him. Let's turn the future into a reality. We remind ourselves that we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. Let's take it to our hearts tonight and into 2014.